Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we are really getting into a monumental piece of Scripture.
Monumental is the right word. We've got a whole stack of sources here, all focused on Psalm 18.
Right. And it's one of those psalms that, it just feels so dense, so full of meaning. The sources give it a specific title.
They do. It's titled The Grateful Retrospect. And that's really our mission for this deep dive, to get into this song of deliverance.
Okay, so what's the plan? What are we looking for?
Well, we want to uncover its core statement of love, which is right at the beginning. Then there are some really startling Christological insights in here.
Okay.
And finally, just the poetry itself, the explosive way it depicts God's nature and his actions. It's just magnificent.
And the context here is just so important, right? This isn't David writing in the heat of the moment after a battle.
Not at all. The sources are pretty clear on this. He's an older man looking back on his life.
How old are we talking?
Well, the suggestion is he's around 67 years old when he pens this, so this is a seasoned perspective.
So it's a historical review, a reflection.
Exactly. One source calls it an epitome of the general history of David's life. It's a summary of everything he's learned, everything he's seen God do over decades.
Decades of being hunted, of fighting, of, eventually ruling as king.
Right. He's looking back over all of it, taking the full measure of what our sources call God's manifold and marvelous mercies.
It's like a lifetime of gratitude, but structured.
That's a great way to put it. It's structured gratitude. And that's why the very first line is, well, it might just be the most important part of the entire song. It sets the stage for everything that follows.
And that's where we need to start.
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this opening verse. The sources use some pretty high slum language for it. They call verse 1 the pinnacle of the temple.
And the apex of the pyramid.
Right, the apex of the pyramid, of this whole look back. Why is that one statement, I will love thee, O Lord, my strength, why is it given so much weight?
Because it's positioned as the crowning grace of the whole thing. I mean, think about it. David is about to list all these victories, all these narrow escapes, all the incredible ways God showed up for him.
The whole catalog of his life.
The whole catalog. But the highest point, the ultimate truth that he's learned from all of it, isn't a boast about being delivered. It's this resolute statement of his heart's posture toward the one who delivered him.
So it's the conclusion he's drawn from everything that's happened.
It's a non-negotiable conclusion. It's the final resolution of a life that was centered on God.
And what's so fascinating is how the sources bring in the parallel account. We know this song shows up elsewhere.
Right, in 2 Samuel chapter 22, it's basically the same song.
But the sources make a huge deal about the fact that verse 1, this apex of devotion, is what they call a most precious addition. It's not in the 10 Samuel version.
And that distinction is just absolutely key to getting the theological weight here.
Why? What does that tell us?
The strong indication from the sources is that Psalm 18 is the later version. It's the refined version.
So 2 Samuel might have been the first draft, so to speak.
You could see it that way. Maybe the 2 Samuel text was his immediate personal outburst of praise, raw in the moment.
Okay.
But Psalm 18 is the matured liturgical anthem. It's been polished, prepared, and submitted to the chief musician for public worship.
For everyone to sing.
For everyone. And the fact that he adds verse 1 in this later version shows that with time, with reflection, with spiritual growth, David realized something.
What's that?
That all the mercies, all the deliverances he's about to list in the psalm, they're secondary. They're secondary to the love they produced in him for God. It's a sign of a mature faith where the gift always, always leads you back to the giver.
Let's focus on the intensity of that word love.
No.
In English, I will love thee sounds, a little simple. But the sources say the original Hebrew is intensely forcible.
Oh, it's far from simple. This isn't passive admiration or just a feeling of gratitude. The Hebrew word is meant to convey something visceral, something intimate and incredibly powerful.
Visceral how?
The commentators suggest this is an affection that springs from the inmost being, or as one puts it, from the bottom of the heart.
Wow.
Yeah. It's the kind of attachment you'd see between a child and a parent, or between a husband and a wife. It's an affection that sort of takes over the deepest core of who you are. It's not just a casual, thanks for the help. It's a consuming love.
A love that's meant to occupy your whole person. And the sources are clear that this intense affection is for the entire Godhead. We're talking about the triune God here.
Precisely, yes. Although David is speaking to the Lord, to Jehovah, the sources clarify that this love is directed toward the triune God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
And what's the reasoning for that?
Well, the logic is that since all three persons of the Trinity have worked together to provide David's salvation, his deliverances, then they each have a claim upon our love.
So the whole Godhead deserves the whole heart.
The warmest love of all our hearts, as one source puts it. So this declaration is rooted in this deep, even if it's implicit, recognition of the fullness of God and the cooperative way they work for a believer's good.
So this isn't just a momentary burst of emotion after a rescue. It's more of a settled position. This declaration is what the sources call his fixed resolution.
That is the perfect phrase for it. It's a fixed resolution. It's a deliberate choice, a settled choice to live in the nearest, most intimate union he possibly can with the Most High.
So it's a purpose statement.
It's a theological purpose. It's a determination to cling to God no matter what happens next. It's the anchor. David is basically saying, come what may, my allegiance, my affection, it's settled right here in this union with the Lord, my strength.
And that ties this whole retrospective psalm together. If the poem is a list of deliverances, then the love in verse 1 is the reason those deliverances were given.
Yes, you've got it. The relationship between God's mercy and our love is the key. The sources say that love for God is the proper end and effect of all his mercies.
The end in effect. So it's the goal.
It's the goal. All the victories, all the rescues, they were meant to guide the believer's heart back to the giver.
I like the analogy one of the sources uses.
The dream.
The stream, yeah. It's a great picture. A stream's waters might travel a long way through all sorts of landscapes, but its final destination is always to return to its source, its spring.
So God delivers us not so we can just enjoy the deliverance itself?
And then forget him. No, he delivers us so that our hearts are turned back irrevocably into intimate union with him. Deliverance is the means. Love for the deliverer is the entire objective.
That makes the structure of the psalm just brilliant. It lays out all the evidence and then basically says, and this is the only logical conclusion you can draw.
It completely reframes what faith is about. It's not a transaction. It's a retrospective designed to spark this resolute affection. If you, the listener, look back at your own life and see God's hand, the sources argue that the highest possible response is this intense, fixed resolution to love him. Okay, so now we move from David's internal heart posture to his public identity. He's this powerful king, but in the psalm's title, he picks a label for himself that feels much more humble.
It's very significant. He calls himself the servant of the Lord.
Not the king of Judah.
No, he deliberately leaves out any mention of his royalty. And the sources say this indicates he counted it a higher honor to be Jehovah's servant than to be the king of Israel. It frames his entire life's value in terms of his service and obedience to God, not his worldly power or status.
And that title, servant of the Lord, it carries a lot of historical weight. It puts him in a very specific line of succession.
A very exclusive one. Historically, that title had really only been given to two people before him.
Moses and Joshua.
Moses and Joshua. So by claiming it, David isn't just being humble. He's identifying himself as their appointed successor.
He's signaling that his reign isn't just about politics.
Not at all. He's saying it's the continuation of the divine mission that started with Moses and was carried out by Joshua, the mission to extend Israel's power over the Promised Land. It connects his kingship all the way back to the Exodus and the covenant.
Now, before we get fully into the Christ-centered reading of the psalm, let's go back to the comparison with 2 Samuel 22. The sources spend time on the tiny differences between the two versions. Jewish scholars apparently count 74 of them. Why does that matter?
Well, the comparison really reinforces the idea that Psalm 18 is the final authoritative liturgical text. It shows kind of spiritual editing process.
So again, 2 Samuel is the raw version.
Perhaps the raw personal record, maybe something he sang privately. But Psalm 18 is the finished product. It's the mature distillation of his faith, prepared specifically for public worship for the whole congregation.
And the small changes show his thought process.
They show his careful theological consideration. He's making sure the text perfectly reflects the ultimate truths about who God is and what his purpose is. It forces us, the readers, to really see this psalm as having an exceptional place in the canon.
Okay, let's get to the sharpest theological point here. The sources use this double exposure analogy. David is the faint outline, but the sharp, dominant image is Jesus. How do they justify saying, a greater than David is here?
They argue that the sheer scope of the psalm, the perfection it describes, the ultimate victory, is just too big, too pure to fit David alone.
It overflows the boundaries of his own life.
It really does. While the psalm is absolutely rooted in David's real history, his struggles and his escapes, the language elevates the subject beyond a mere human experience to the divine human mediator.
So David is the type.
David is the type, the foreshadowing, and Christ is the antitype, the reality that was casting that shadow all along. The claims David makes about himself, about the universal rule he has, they only find their perfect, flawless fulfillment in Christ.
And the most solid proof for this reading comes directly from the New Testament.
It does. This isn't just later interpretation being read back into the text. The New Testament writers themselves apply this psalm directly to Jesus. Verses 2 and 49 are quoted explicitly.
How do we see that?
Verse 2, where David calls God his rock, is cited in Hebrews 2.33, and verse 49, which talks about praising God among the Gentiles, is quoted in Romans 15.9.
And in both cases, they're presented as the words of Jesus himself.
Exactly. They are put directly into the mouth of the Lord Jesus. This confirms that the inspired writers understood that David's Lord is speaking here, alongside David. It makes the prophetic nature of the psalm undeniable.
Okay, this brings us to what is probably the biggest hurdle for anyone reading this psalm. David makes these incredible claims of personal purity. He says things like, "The Lord rewarded me according to my righteousness."
Right.
And you just have to stop and say, wait a minute, this is David we're talking about, the David of Bathsheba, of Uriah, of the sinful census. How can a man like that, a humble sinner, make such a claim?
And that is the essential tension the sources have to resolve. If you apply those words literally and only to David, they're impossible to justify. David was a man saved by grace who was constantly aware of his own sinfulness.
So what's the key?
The key is to see them as prophetical. When you apply that double exposure lens, the statements are, as one source says, readily understood as speaking of the Messiah.
Because Jesus actually did possess that perfect righteousness.
He possessed intrinsic, absolute, perfect righteousness. His moral garments were white as snow. He had no fault, no blameworthiness at all.
So the psalm is looking past David's own failings to the perfect life that Christ would lead.
Exactly. It's on the basis of that flawless righteousness that the Messiah can claim his reward, his deliverance from death. So David's claims of purity are only ultimately true in Christ.
How do you think David understood it when he sang it?
Well, when David sang it, he was likely reflecting an ideal of righteousness that he sincerely aimed for, but he knew in his heart he could never fully achieve. But when Christ utters it, he is speaking literal, absolute truth. And that elevates the entire psalm from just a personal memoir to a messianic creed.
The scope of the victory described also seems too big for the historical David. Verse 43 says, "Thou hast made me the head of the heathen." I mean, David was a successful military commander, but his kingdom was still geographically limited.
This is another massive claim that just demands the messianic reading. The sources say there is far more of Jesus than of David here.
David's conquests were regional.
Regional at best. Christ's victory is universal. This verse is referring to the spiritual and total triumph, the headship of the crucified over all the nations, the Gentiles. It's a prophecy about the rapid obedience of nations to the gospel, something that goes far beyond what David ever accomplished with his armies.
So when David talks about nations submitting to him, he's actually setting the stage for the Great Commission and the growth of the church.
Precisely. He's describing the power of the gospel to bring what he calls heathen lands to own the headship of the crucified. And the victory is spiritual and swift. Nations are born in a day. They yield to Jesus as soon as they hear the message. David was a local king. Christ is the global, eternal king whose rule is established by hearts submitting, not just armies conquering. The sheer scale just screams that Christ is the main subject.
And lastly, the suffering. The agony described in the psalm finds its deepest meaning in the passion of Christ.
The language he uses is just so intense. He talks about being compassed by the sorrows of death and surrounded by floods of ungodly men.
Now, David certainly faced that from Saul.
He absolutely did. But the sources argue these descriptions find their deepest and profoundest fulfillment in the agony Christ endured. We're talking about the total isolation, the weight of the world's sin, the inescapable suffering in Gethsemane and on the cross.
Can you describe that agony using the psalm's imagery?
Well, the sources focus on the imagery of being trapped. Christ was surrounded by the cords of pain, the blasphemies of the cruel. David speaks of being bound like a malefactor for execution and hunted by the snares of deadly craft. It suggests a situation where there is no earthly escape, where only immediate divine intervention can save you.
Overwhelming and crushing.
An inescapable suffering. the ultimate showdown with sin and death. It perfectly captures Christ's sacrificial experience in a way that goes far beyond David's historical escapes from Saul. David's experience was temporary. Christ's was redemptive for all time.
Okay, let's shift from the prophecy to the poetry. David's description of God in verse 2 is just magnificent. He doesn't just use one title, he stacks them up. Let's start with God as this immovable defensive structure.
Yeah, it's a catalog of 7 incredible titles, right in verse 2. And the sources suggest it's designed to equip the faithful from head to foot with total confidence in God's protection.
It begins with God as his rock.
The rock. That single word has a double meaning. It's a place of concealment where you can hide from your enemies. And it's also a foundation of absolute immobility. It means permanent, unchanging security.
And the other titles build on that same idea of a safe architectural structure.
Absolutely. God is also a fortress, which is like a highly defended military garrison. He's the deliverer, the one who actively steps in to snatch you out of danger. And then he is the high tower.
What does that add? The high tower.
That implies a citadel, a fortress built way up high on a rocky cliff. And that elevation lets the believer look down on their enemies. You can see them trying to get to you, but you have no alarm because you know your position is unassailable.
And you get the personal military gear, the buckler.
Right, the buckler is the large shield. It's used to ward off blows and arrows. It represents complete defensive coverage for the whole person. But as strong as all those defensive images are, the list suddenly takes a sharp turn with the most unique metaphor of all.
The horn of salvation.
The horn of salvation.
Why is that one so different from the rock and the shield?
Because it shifts the focus entirely from defense to offense. A shield is protective, but a horn signifies strength to attack, to conquer, to push down your enemies. It speaks of holy exaltation in victory.
So where does that metaphor come from?
The sources explain it's derived from horned animals, like the wild ox. Their primary strength for both defending themselves and for attacking lies in their powerful horns. So God isn't just a wall to hide behind. He gives the believer the power to strike back and drive away their adversaries. It's a symbol of dominion.
And to make this image really concrete, the sources bring up a really interesting cultural practice from Abyssinia, the kern.
The kern, yeah, this is a fascinating little detail that just illuminates the whole metaphor.
So describe it for us. What is it?
It's described as a ceremonial headdress. It's a conical piece of silver, or sometimes gilt, maybe 4 inches long. It looks a bit like a candle snuffer, and it was worn vertically right in the middle of the forehead on a large band.
Okay, but what's the significance of wearing it?
Here's the crucial part. Its use was highly restricted. It was reserved exclusively for reviews or parades after victory.
After victory, so it's a victory symbol.
It immediately changes how you hear phrases like lifting up the horn. The sources suggest that when the Bible talks about the horn being exalted or lifted up, it's a direct allusion to this practice. It's a visible, public, ceremonial announcement of victory and dominion.
So David calls God the horn of his salvation. He's saying God is his public triumph.
He's invoking an image of God not just as his quiet, secret protection, but as the visible, conquering source of his success, worn like a crown of victory for the whole world to see.
And there's a deeper theological point here tied to this whole list of titles that connects back to that fixed love in verse 1.
Yes. The vital point is this. David doesn't say that God gives him a rock or gives him a horn.
He says God is the rock.
God is the rock. God is the horn of his salvation. It's a subtle but absolutely essential distinction. It places all the value on God himself, not just on the benefits he provides. Having God, that intimate union, is the strength, the honor, the victory. God himself is the all-sufficient source.
Then we get this dramatic shift in imagery. We go from the stable, immovable rock to this explosive, cosmic picture of God as the terrifying avenger.
The consuming storm, yeah. This section describes God's immediate response when David cries out for help. The prayer itself is called the postern gate.
What's a poster's gate?
It's a fantastic analogy. It's a small, hidden door in a castle wall, one that stays open even when the city is under siege and the main gates are all barred. David's prayer is that constantly open channel to God, and when he uses it, the response is swift and terrifying for his enemies.
The whole world seems to shake.
The earth shakes, a tempest roars, fire consumes. It signals God's fierce wrath against those who dared to threaten his servant.
And that divine anger is depicted with some really visceral, physical imagery. The sources get into the cultural interpretation of where God's wrath is seated.
They do. The psalm says God's anger is poetically seated in his nose or his nostrils.
Which sounds very strange to us.
It does, but it's described as a violent oriental method of expressing fierce wrath. It's based on a physiological reality. When you get really angry, your breathing becomes heavy and hot. Your breath gets vehement.
So when the psalm says there went up a smoke out of his nostrils, it's not just a random image.
Yeah.
It's the physical sign of this burning indignation.
Exactly. The image is of the Almighty Deliverer pouring forth smoke in the heat of his wrath. It shows that God isn't a distant, static being. He's an active, passionate king who responds to threats against his chosen ones with unmitigated force. The smoke and fire are the result of that fierce breath.
And this anger is followed by a majestic arrival. God descends with darkness and incredible speed.
He comes in a hurry. He bows the heavens and uses thick darkness as a secret pavilion, a tent, to hide his overwhelming glory from human eyes, even as he fights from within the storm clouds.
And he rides on a cherub.
Right. And the cherub here isn't just an angel, it's a symbol of all of creation's power.
What does it symbolize exactly?
It combines the intelligence of man, the majesty of the lion, the strength of the ox, and the life or speed of the eagle. By riding the cherub, God is showing that all the powers of nature are serving as his vehicle to rush to the rescue. He flies on the wings of the wind. It's all about admirable swiftness. There's no delay when the avenger comes.
And this arrival is matched by a terrifying display of celestial weapons to scatter the enemy.
God uses the ultimate arsenal, nature itself. You have lightning, hailstones, coals of fire, thunder. The elements become his weapons. The sources describe his lightning bolts as arrows, feathered with lightning and barbed with everlasting death. Yeah, they scatter the foes instantly. God is a warrior fighting from inside the storm, turning the very atmosphere against the enemy. The entire planet reacts. The foundations of the hills shake. The bottom of the ocean is laid bare, all because of God's rebuke. It's a total mobilization of creation itself.
And in the middle of all this cosmic chaos, the deliverance itself is described with an image that links right back to the messianic prophecy of the resurrection.
There's a powerful parallel there. David says, "He drew me out of many waters." Now, you could link that to Moses being drawn from the Nile, but its greatest fulfillment points to Christ.
How so?
The many waters symbolize Christ's overwhelming suffering, his baptism in many waters of agony and in his own blood. So being drawn out of those waters is the triumphant rescue. It's the resurrection, which redeems his people from wrath. David's literal deliverance foreshadows the spiritual, eternal deliverance of the Son of David.
That incredible display of divine power leads us right into the next big theological idea. This attribute of God as a moral mirror. The psalm says God shows himself to us based on our own character.
This is a really deep point about God's moral government. The psalm states that God is just and reflective in how he deals with us. He gives to each person according to their own measure.
So to the merciful, he's merciful.
He shows himself merciful to the merciful, upright to the upright. He is pure to the pure. If we come to him with sincerity and honesty, we find him responding in kind with grace and honesty.
But the contrast is so stark for the opposition. To the froward, God shows himself froward. Now, froward is a word we don't use much. What does it mean for God to do that?
The Hebrew root for froward means crooked or twisted. It refers to human stubbornness, willful perversity, someone choosing a deceptive, complicated path on purpose.
Okay.
So when the psalm says God shows himself froward to them, it doesn't mean God becomes sinful. It means he engages in what the sources call judicial opposition. He wrestles with their deliberate crookedness.
So if a person chooses a path of deceit, God doesn't just make it easy for them.
Not at all. God meets their cunning with his own sacred, righteous craft. He allows their own stubbornness to be their undoing. He might even, as one source says, break them in pieces. He outwits the crafty in their own game, proving that human manipulation is always subject to his divine countermove. It's God showing his sovereignty by meeting rebellion with perfectly tailored resistance.
Now let's bring this back to David's situation and those claims of integrity. We have to clarify how a flawed man can say his deliverance was justified because he was upright and had kept himself from mine iniquity.
It is so important to read that statement, "The Lord rewarded me according to my righteousness," in its proper context. This is about providential government, not ultimate spiritual salvation, which is by grace alone.
So this isn't David claiming to be sinless.
Not at all. This isn't self-righteousness. It's a declaration of his moral integrity in a specific earthly situation. He's saying he maintained a clear conscience, specifically in the face of his accusers like King Saul, who was falsely charging him with treason.
He's saying he was innocent of the specific crimes they accused him of.
Precisely. He's saying he maintained integrity in how he governed and that he valued service over abusing his power. And when he talks about keeping himself from mine iniquity, The sources suggest this phrase refers to a particular besetting sin.
His own personal weakness.
His own personal weakness, a temptation he was naturally prone to, maybe impatience or pride or lust. He's saying he didn't allow himself to rest in that sin, to willfully continue in it.
That makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
He's claiming sincerity, not perfection.
That is the key distinction. A godly person can be overtaken by sin through weakness, but they don't sin wickedly, that is, with design, willfully, defiantly. David is saying he didn't throw out God's laws. His deliverance in this context was justified because his conduct toward his enemies had been upright, even if his spiritual standing before God depended entirely on grace.
And the sources also show how God doesn't just deliver externally. He's a personal equipper. He strengthens the believer from the inside for the fight.
Yes, this section outlines the complete internal gear God provides for spiritual warfare. First, God girds the warrior with strength. This is like the ancient practice of tying a belt around your waist for support. Without that divine power belt, the warrior is just feeble.
So it's inner dynamic power.
Exactly. And that strength is immediately paired with a gift of agility for dangerous situations.
The hinds feet.
God makes the believer's feet like hinds' feet. The hind, or female deer, is known for being incredibly swift. But more than that, it's known for its stability, its ability to stand firmly on high, dangerous cliffs where anyone else would slip and fall. It's a symbol of both speed and unshakable stability in times of great peril.
And God is also the drill master, teaching how to fight, even giving supernatural physical strength.
Absolutely. He teaches the hands to war, which means even great skill in combat is a divine gift, not just natural talent. And this is shown by the superhuman feats like being able to break a bow of steel or brass.
Which would be impossible for a normal person.
It would require immense force, maybe even using your feet to bend it, let alone break it. So David's ability to do that proves his strength was a divine gift.
But for all this talk of strength and skill, David says his greatness, his rise from a shepherd boy to a king, came from the most unexpected place.
This is maybe the most humbling line in the whole psalm. It just turns our ideas of greatness upside down. David says his greatness came not from his own skill, not even from God's raw power, but from God's gentleness or his condescension.
That difference between gentleness and condescension seems important.
It is. The sources stress that the root idea is of God making himself little or stooping down. This act of divine humility is the actual cause of the believer being made great.
So God stoops down to lift us up.
He stoops down to the lowly and contrite heart and lifts them out of the dust. It's his goodness, his gracious condescension to our low state that secures our success. Our exaltation is directly related to God's humility and how he deals with us.
And finally, God is the one who sustains the believer, who provides light in the darkness.
He's the lamplighter, the one who lights the candle of the believer, turning darkness into light, sorrow into joy. This light represents comfort and salvation. And while the candle, our personal evidence of faith, is our own, the holy fire that keeps it lit comes only from God himself. He is the constant sustainer of life and light in the believer's soul.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into Psalm 18, it's amazing how this very personal look back, this catalog of David's rescues, becomes the prophetic blueprint for the central act of salvation history.
This whole magnificent song really comes to its climax in the story of the Messiah. Jesus Christ suffered the sorrows of death. He was afflicted, surrounded by his enemies.
Pleaded his righteousness.
His perfect intrinsic righteousness. He was rescued from the many waters of judgment and agony, and then he rose in triumph. And now he reigns as the anointed king, the head of the heathen, making sure that the deliverance he won is available for his people.
So David's personal experience, when magnified through Christ, guarantees that final outcome in the psalm, great deliverance for his anointed. All of that mercy, all those victories, are secured for us in Christ.
And the sources point out that the word is plural, deliverances. It shows the variety, the completeness, the absolute certainty of the salvation our King provides. Jesus is now far above all principalities and powers, upholding the covenant and guaranteeing continuous, varied rescue for everyone who trusts in him.
So for you, the listener, thinking about how David chose to identify himself offers a really powerful challenge for how we see our own purpose.
He was the mighty king, but he made a conscious choice to value being the servant of the Lord more than anything else. So for us, if we see our highest calling as simple service to God, it has to change how we view worldly status or success.
Our true standing isn't what we own or who we manage.
It's defined entirely by whom we serve and the obedience we give.
And finally, let's go back to where we started, to that apex of the pyramid. All of David's experiences, all the mercies, were meant to lead him back to that one central, passionate purpose.
David's declaration, "I will love thee, O Lord, my strength," is the vital starting point for a life of faith that's built on gratitude. It's that fixed, intense resolution that makes sure all of God's mercies flow back to the giver. So as you look back on God's merciful actions in your own life, big and small, consider this. Is your ultimate response, your deepest, most settled affection, that same intimate love for the triune God? Is love the crowning grace of your own life's retrospect?